Hello and welcome to a very special Saturday spirituality group with our special guest, Chris Ancona. Chris is a neuroscientist and a philosopher, and he wrote a book called the Alignment Quotient, which is all about how we can better align with the universe and just make our lives so much more flowing. And so, without further ado, I give you Chris Ancona. Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, golly. Well, thanks for the introduction. Actually, just maybe I'll give a twist on the introduction of the book. What I do is I focus on you as yourself and then what you want to put into the universe. Um, Part of that is because, at least in where I'm seeing it, aligning with the universe is like this space that we inhabit. And like there is no aligning with it because it's actually quite chaotic. And I actually tell people following your emotions is a bit like chasing after a feather caught in a tornado. So I look at it kind of like that way. And some of that's based upon mathematics and some of it's based upon just philosophical ideas. But yeah, I think that's just important to set so the conversation goes in maybe a more interesting way compared to, well, maybe compared to the way that you guys are already thinking, because I know a lot of people already think one way, and this definitely is a different perspective on it. So actually, for talking about things, I want to make it a little bit open and kind of see what you're interested in, rather than just to talk and then put something out there that maybe you're boring or it's not aligned with what you want to talk about. But just as an introduction, my work has been so I worked with the University of Iowa. I'm actually a graduate. I have an engineering degree from University of Michigan, and then I spent a lot of time working with the University of Iowa to create tools that help with particular leadership issues, mostly understanding of self. And as part of that, we invented and put together a lot of biometric data that we put students through specific activities that are calibrated, and we measure their responses to them. And then because we have large data sets, we're able to tell them, where are you relative to other people on these particular issues? So for example, resilience. And one of the things that comes up through that is a lot of the students say, okay, but why? Like there's this, let's say, very difficult question of like, okay, why do I even want to do anything? Like, what is the purpose behind me being here? And working with business school students, what we see is that that we've actually had business school students that have come wanting to take the leadership program because they were considering suicide, and they had these deep questions, and they were hoping they could get answers to them. And so there's a lot of depth here. We work with a lot of counseling psychiatrists, neuroscientists, people from a lot of different disciplines through the program. I also wrote a book with a neuroscientist named Dan Radecki about psychological safety, which is about your innate brain-based triggers that can trigger you off into doing something other than what maybe you would prefer to be doing at the moment. So yeah, but maybe with that just gives you kind of like a flavor of what we can talk about. And then also just to let you know, two things I'm working on. One is showing that there's a possibility for free will, partially because the current scientific community believes in determinism. Like if we could know everything back to the Big Bang, as far as every particle movement, everything, then we could today calculate what was going to happen next, right? That's determinism, different than fatalism, which is no matter what I do next, I'm free to do whatever I want to do next, but in the end, I'm going to end up in the exact same place, right? That's fatalism. Determinism is more like dominoes falling, where I could determine the next domino, and then the next domino, and the next domino, right? So that's more what determinism says. But that omits free will. And the current scientific theory is that free will does not exist. So I'm working on saying, can I prove that free will is a possibility? The other thing I'm looking at is, what is consciousness, which is a big topic, actually a very complicated topic, and getting more complicated as time goes by. And just to let you know, there is no consensus on what the definition of consciousness is. So there are different theories of what consciousness is, but there is no consensus on even the definition. So this is also another area that I'm working on. But anyways, maybe by throwing that on, hopefully there's enough meat and food on the table that you guys can ask questions and we can guide the conversation into something that actually interests you.
Yes, that that was all very fascinating stuff, man. Oh man. So okay, we got a question. Go, Harvey.
It's not so much a question as the things that you brought up are quite fascinating to me. This past Wednesday, I actually listened to a wonderful, wonderful lecture on the non-locality of consciousness, and I pretty much subscribe to it. I think it makes more sense than anything else that I've studied. Um, I'm also fascinated with left and right brain research because I find that a fascinating thing. I brought up during the lecture the the corpus callosum and its role in saving the left brain from being overwhelmed and how that operates, which we don't know too much about, I don't think. And um, and the last thing is free will is one of my favorites. And I don't believe in free will at all. I believe free will could be possible, remotely possible, but we have so many areas that have to be considered. I'm thinking about the white what the heck do they call it? The white uniform social test that was done many years ago. A horrible thing, but they actually got people who would normally not harm a fly to give people high levels of what they thought anyway of voltage.
Mm-hmm.
So, and hypnosis seems to suggest that that free will is not really possible because the rationalizations that people come up with as a result of what they've been suggested in hypnosis are always rationalizations and not really based on fact. So there's a lot of areas that I'd be interested in hearing more about. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, super interesting stuff. Actually, you covered a whole lot of things. Not sure if we should start with consciousness or free will. Maybe because I saw a question from Angela. We'll start with free will and come back to consciousness. So one of the theories of free will is that it's not incompatible with determinism, like she said. Whereas like the free will is like whether you have a choice or not, you feel like you have a choice to move on to the next thing, even if it would have been determined. It's something along those lines, just being general. What I believe is actually a bit more profound, that free will actually exists, like in a true form. And some of the experiments you talked about come a bit from physicalists. So there are people who believe that the brain is basically another series of dominoes. But what we're actually finding when we dig a bit deeper is, and I don't want to discount the experiments, particularly the shock experiment, which is fascinating, right? And if you want a book about something along those lines, there's a book called Ordinary Men, which is a historical study looking at regular police officers and what they actually did during the time of the Holocaust. Regular people, it's fascinating books, very scary and very sad, but it's that experiment in real life having actually occurred with murdering people. So yeah, so I get that. But when we look a bit deeper into the mathematics of how the universe works, what we're finding is that there's far more chaos than we realize. And most people, chaos theory is actually kind of an old thing now. It's like decades and decades old. But we're finding it has more and more applicability into things. So, for example, if we want to predict weather, what we find is if we create mathematical models based upon past data, we get a result. When we put chaotic motion in that theory, the predictions get better. So it's kind of weird that you actually need this chaos thing, which doesn't make a lot of sense when you look at what free will would be or what determinism would be as a calculation. And then I see your hands up. Let me just bring in one more thing just to kind of like lay it out. Determinism, the way that scientists see it, is like a series of dominoes falling. I'm not suggesting that dominoes don't fall. I'm suggesting that inside of those dominoes falling, there's something like coin flips in there as well. So it looks a little bit more like, I don't know if you're familiar with Markov blankets, but it looks a little bit more like a Markov blanket intertwined with dominoes rather than just purely dominoes. right? Okay, and I see you have a hand up, so I'll let you, because it's a big topic. We could talk forever.
Yeah, I just think it's important because people do equate randomness with chaos, and it has to be understood that they are two different things, and that chaos actually has elements of patterning.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And also leads often to back to order. So, for example, the boiling of water
chaotic motion in fluids
is chaotic until it becomes orderly in the form of steam.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas randomness remains random.
Right. Well, randomness can have a shape, right? So when we talk about coin flips, you still only have a heads and a tails, right? You don't have anything out of there, right? You have something in a format. And even if it's a dice roll, right? If it's 6-sided dice, you're going to get 1 to 6. You're not going to get 12 out of a dice roll, right? Whereas true randomness would suggest that if I roll a 6-sided dice, I could have any number 1 to infinity, right? So it does have a shape and a form. That seems obvious. But there's some weird things going on. Like, for example, and this starts to get a little bit into the consciousness stuff. So I'll do my best to stay on the free will side of this. It seems that on a cellular level, we have structures called microtubules, and their structure. So you're familiar with that work. These microtubule things, they seem to be able to interact on a quantum level, and I have to be careful we don't bridge too much into the consciousness part. But at the quantum level, you basically have uncertainty, and it's not just uncertainty because we can't calculate, which is what some people think. Pilot wave theory, if you're familiar with that, suggests that there's uncertainty just because we don't know. But it seems the equations really are uncertain. There is no truth yet. There is a kind of like range of potential truth, but there isn't fact. There isn't a single fact. There's a bunch of potential facts, like what the lottery numbers, a little bit like what the lottery numbers are going to be. We know they're going to be a certain group that's going to be there, but we don't know exactly what it is until the number actually comes up. And it seems that isn't something that's able to be predetermined, right? This gets into really complicated mathematics. I don't want to go there, so I'll keep it kind of higher level. But if our cells operate in this area, then there is this amount of uncertainty in what's going to happen next that does occur. So one of the things that's being considered in neuroscience, and this is a big topic too, is what causes? So everybody knows, like, there's these little things that almost touch each other, and then there's a action potential that causes like a firing of a neuron. The question has been, what has caused that firing? And it looks like there's some relationship to these microtubules that interact on this quantum level, which is kind of weird. So if you are able to bring this somewhat, let's say, chaos, this somewhat randomness, but with a form into cellular decision making, then it opens up this new realm. And just to be fair, I mean, I've been working on this free will thing for a number of years, and I'm not sure I'm going to solve it before I die, right? So this is a big topic. I have I don't want to let you believe that I have this figured out. It's a work in progress. And like I said, I'm not sure that I'll be able to finish it before I die, right? It's a big thing. Nobody else has finished it, so I don't see why I should be the one. And I'm still working on it, hoping. So yeah, I understand there's a lot of stuff that suggests that determinism is the way, but when you look at a lower level, you find out maybe not. Not for sure not, but maybe not. And so my goal is actually to put reasonable doubt into that argument. And yeah, it's a process.
Tiffany.
I'm wondering if, because determinism, we're only considering ourselves and the goal that we're attempting to reach, whereas in the fatalism, that's the one that infuses some chaos, right?
Well, fatalism brings in an end result independent of the process.
Independent of the process.
Right. So it's like if I were to tell you on June 20th, 2030, you're going to be sitting in a park in San Francisco. There's absolutely you can do anything you want between now and then. But no matter what you do, on that
Uh-huh.
date, you're going to be sitting in a park in San
No
Francisco,
matter
right?
what. Okay.
No matter
Okay.
what, right? So so
Mm-hmm.
there's form to it because there's an endpoint that's guaranteed, but the
Mm-hmm.
process to get there doesn't matter, right? You're going to do all kinds of
Okay.
stuff,
Okay.
right?
I'm following now. Um, yeah, but what really resonated for me is that when I think of everything that has happened in this conversation, I think of the fact that in determining outcomes, we have to consider more than just ourselves. And I think that when we but then maybe there's both. Can it be a both situation as
Well, I
well?
think it has to be,
Yeah.
right? It has to be. So
Yeah.
what free will does, and one of the reasons that I'm looking at it is if I can't, I believe I can make choices about who I am and everything independent of my past, right? And this is a belief. So I believe I can actually choose something different and distinct from my past.
Mhm.
So this is why this is so interesting. Now I could be wrong, but at least my experience of my life feels like I'm not wrong. I don't know if that's true, right? But it feels like there's something interesting there, right? That's
Or
different.
maybe there's a geographic element because in some places you may be able to do something completely different, whereas if you go to other places, your past is right there. So maybe it's about where you choose to go, and like you could still make different choices, but I feel like there's always the external. We have to think about other people. We have to think about other like venues and
Well, you don't
situations
have
and
to.
things.
You're
We
not
don't, I mean,
required
you
to
don't
think
have
about
to.
other
You don't
people,
have to.
right?
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to.
But
I mean,
determinism would suggest that maybe you would, right? You
yeah.
would have to do something,
Hey,
right?
I don't have to think about this computer screen sitting in front of my face, but does that change that the computer screen is right there, right? Maybe if I like concentrate real bad, like real hard, like it could make the computer screen disappear, right?
Well, I
But
don't believe in that. I don't that seems to be
yeah,
something distinct from free will, right? The fact that something
hmm
exists or not is
yeah,
independent of whether or not I have a choice about something, right? Like
hmm
I have a
hmm
choice about whether or
hmm
not I look at the computer this way or this way. But
yeah,
I'm not like what the fact that a computer is there, it's independent. It seems to be independent of any choice
yeah.
that I have about it, right? Because there's me and then
Okay,
there's the computer. We're in at least right now, we're separate from each other, right? Now there are some theories that there's only one electron in the whole universe and it's just leaping all over the place and everything's created from one electron, right? But in which case I would be actually indistinguishable from the computer, like from the big picture.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
totally different rabbit hole. Um, and that's not actually where I'm working. So
yeah.
um, the fact I accept that there's a thing which is independent of me. But to your point, and getting back
hmm
to that, the reason I say you don't have to consider is because there are people who don't. When you look at psychopaths, they
Yeah,
actually don't care, right? So there's
they
no need,
really
there's no
don't.
requirement to care, right? The fact that we do is something that, obviously if we're not psychopaths, we're more likely to care because that's the way our
hmm
brains work.
hmm
But we could also turn off caring sometime, which may actually be useful,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. So when we bring it down to a ground level, so here's this person and because we're looking at the past and we're looking at this person who is, you know, when we look at the alignment quotient and we look at rebuilding or building a life, not even rebuilding, building a different life. And we have this person who has been a rampant drug user and just overall low grade sociopath around their, relations and things like that. And now they're saying they want to be a motivational speaker, right?
Mhm.
So that's where I'm saying is like in that spot, like some places you're just not going to be able to be a motivational speaker because nobody really wants to hear what you have to say, right? Because you've created these holes. So but it doesn't mean you can't be a motivational speaker somewhere else.
Well, sure. I mean, the Dalai Lama can't be a motivational speaker in every place in the world either, right?
Yeah,
That's normal. Like that applies to anybody, right? There's people who
yeah,
you can resonate with, that are willing to listen to you, and people not. So I think that's normal. Now, a psychopathic drug dealer wanting to become a motivational speaker, probably that's going to take some time, and that's going to take some effort. That's not going to happen overnight. So there's going to be a process.
Yes.
And eventually that person will say, well, maybe they'll say, I used to be this. And at some point,
let's see your fingers. If you, oh, there you go, Stan. Go ahead.
Got to unmute here. Hey, good morning. I'm Stan, and I'm an alcoholic. I do that too. I used to be a rampant drug user and sometimes somewhat sociopathic kind of personality, both self-destructive but also destructive to others. But I've changed, and I'm not that anymore. But I am, in some sense. I was thinking just about how, you know, I am all these things that I have experienced and been part of, and everything else. But I wanted to talk about a couple of other things. I've been reading, well, you referred, it was Roger Penrose who developed a theory about the microtubules, and he's actually a mathematician.
Well, Stuart Haberhoff and Robert and Penrose actually brought the physics into it. So it's actually the combination of the two guys. Stuart Haberhoff is actually a cellular biologist, so he brought that to Penrose. But yeah, you're right. Those are the.
And it always seemed to make a certain kind of sense, knowing what I know about quantum mechanics. But I'd like to share a little bit of my experience and my interest in this. We were talking about the self earlier, and I'd like to I'm hoping that we can revisit that and talk more about that. Now, in my own experience, my mom was a World War II survivor. She was in the resistance in Warsaw. She was still a child. She was captured and she was a POW, and eventually repatriated through England, where I was born, to Chicago, where I grew up. And about 15 years after the war, she had developed a, what am I looking for? Did we lose? Oh, I'm sorry. No, just the screen jumped. Yeah, so when I was 10, 12 years old, so around the early 60s, she developed a syndrome, a condition. She became very paranoid about conspiracies to hurt her and hurt her family. And it was something that was actually, I mean, not common, but I saw more of that in the Polish community in Chicago, where I grew up. There were other trauma survivors who responded that way, and they call it schizophrenia. But so as a 12-year-old kid, I wanted to fix her because I wanted her back, and she had disappeared, and there was this other person. So I became really interested in this idea of what that is, that thing that makes us who I am, that self. And that's been kind of a lifelong study. Charles Taylor has helped me, but there's been a lot of sources I've read for, you know, throughout all these years, and had personal experiences. But the idea of what makes us a self. I wouldn't be the same individual that I am had I been conceived a month later, because it would have been a different egg and a different sperm. And potentially all those things would have multiplied into potentially a very different existence. But I still have a hard time grasping this notion of what makes me Stan, you Chris, and Dan, and how we become this. It seems to me that we're kind of thrown into it. We didn't ask, you know, do you want to be born? You know, we're born. It happened. We're kind of thrown into this experience of being a human being. And so what is that self? How do we construct that? We try to maintain some sort of integrity to it. The other thing that, and I'd really like to hear kind of your thoughts on what, you know, how we construct, how we become a self, an individual entity in this world of individuals. And the other thing is this notion of and Harvey, you kind of touched on that, Chris Doige, but pantheism and integrated information theory, the idea that information exists at a very fundamental level throughout the universe, and somehow we have this particular experience arising out of that. But information is basically contained in anything that results in a difference. And I find that notion satisfying philosophically, I think. And it sort of makes sense that this would be like the sea, you know, to the fish, or the air to us. It's something that we're simply swimming in. We're not consciously aware of it, but it's always there, and it's there in everything, to a greater or lesser level. With integrated information theory, they try to quantify it. They try to find ways of measuring consciousness to some extent, in order to be able to determine whether people who are lying as a head in a bed, you know, following a traumatic brain event,
Locked into.
determine their level of consciousness. So following up on that, I had another experience in '96. My wife and I were out for coffee in a little bookstore in our town called Heaven, and she went face down in her blueberry pie. She'd had an aneurysm blowout in her lower brain, and she was immediately locked in because of the hemorrhage had caused inflammation in the neurons in the thalamus, and she became disconnected from her body. Her consciousness was there, but she couldn't connect to her body at all. She recovered from that, but 11 days later, she went through surgery, which left permanent damage to her thalamus. And for 2 months, she was locked in, gradually through working with her body, helping her move and just being there with her. I would get into bed with her at the hospital, and I would lie against her, and just all kinds of different things that we did. And she did come back. She did reconnect. But I became really aware of this disconnect because she never fully reconnected to her body. And now actually she's living with dementia, has had dementia for a number of years. But this idea of the going to the mind-body problem, you know, what is mind, what is body? You know, I always believed that was one and the same altogether, an expression of this information, right? But with Judith, I found her to be disconnected. I found a literal disconnect between mind and body. She could not, everything was working up here, but it couldn't pass through. She was disconnected. She couldn't move her legs. She couldn't move anything. And that just left me really confused. I've done all kinds of research, neurology and understanding, you know, again, I believe that the mind doesn't exist without the body. I think that it's all, you know, basically a process of physiology, and if I blow my brains out, there won't be much to you know. So, okay, I've talked enough, but I'm really curious about your thoughts, because you've been studying this in a much more academic way than I have. And first of all, what do you think constitutes a self?
Well, let me say congratulations on surviving, right? Because there's a lot of stuff you've been through. It sounds like just surviving, that's quite an accomplishment. Getting to your question about self, like I said, there is no agreed definition of consciousness. For self, there is a thing called personal identity, which I think if you want to look into it, that's actually a fully interesting topic. I'm in the space where I think personal identity is different than conscious. They're distinct things. And so what I focused on, so personal identity can be a lot of stuff. It's your stories from your past, it's the experiences you've gone through, how they've affected you emotionally, how those emotional things have rewired your brain. There's all kinds of stuff that goes into how you look at it, right? How you look at yourself and how you create that identity. So I know, like, my past is I grew up in a very abusive situation, and during that time it was horrible. Now looking back on it, the story that I tell myself about that is a totally different story. And it's a positive story. Like, I know I wouldn't be me if I hadn't gone through that. But I don't identify myself with a victim of abuse. I identify myself as me, right? As an identity, and the abuse helped make me. You know, like, and I don't know how you have dealt with your past. And if you say, hey, look, I still am that, or that helped make me into the person I am today, which is different than that, right? And that's a very personal decision. That's a very personal way of deciding to look at something. When I look at answering the question who I am, though, so I've been doing this little project on the side, and it's a survey, and I ask people 2 questions. That's it in the whole survey. I say, okay, you meet somebody online, and you are going to have to explain them who you are, but you have to do it without a camera. They can't see you, right? They can just hear your voice, or you have to type. And people respond to this with a couple of different categories, a few different categories. They explain their past, right? Where they're from, their physical characteristics, their roles they play in their life. I'm a husband, I'm a teacher, I'm whatever. And that's pretty much it, right? And that's how they do. Sometimes their hobbies or things like that, what they're passionate about, that type of stuff. But then I ask the next question. So you had a really bad day at work. You're coming home. You're going to call somebody. Who is that person that you're going to call with? And you can't say their name, right? And what they unavoidably say is, oh, well, it's somebody who's generous. It's somebody who's a good listener. It's somebody who's empathetic, right? It's these characteristics, and we call them characteristics. And I think that's more something that is who we are rather than the past, right? Or rather than our roles. And there's a number of reasons for that. Some of it is aligned with psychology and also with ancient philosophies like Stoicism. We won't have to get into that. I know there's pros and negatives seen about Stoic ideas, but it seemed to be more aligned with some of these other things. So if who I am is, and I focus on, I don't know, being peace or being joy or being empathetic, I can do that in this moment. There's something I can do about it right now. And when people are, I mean, I think everybody in this group has been through experiences where things are really bad, and getting up in the morning is hard. And a lot of times you get through it by putting just one step in front of the next, just one little teeny tiny thing, because that's all you have the energy to do. And I mean, I've been through the same. And by saying, okay, who I am is empathetic or peace or joy or whatever, that's about something you can do in the next 5 seconds. It's a decision in the next 5. That's it. It's not about I'm going to be in the future somebody who's peaceful, or I'm going to be somebody in the future who's empathetic, but right now, no. It's right now and right now and right now and right now. So it allows you to make little steps. And what you see is if you keep making little steps over a long time, that's who you become. Like, you rewire your brain in that way. And there's a great guy, Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, who wrote a book called The Brain That Changes Itself, which is kind of a play on words because he doesn't understand what that is, but he knows that's the reality. And so, and he's actually one of the ones more on the religious side of consciousness. He's a very interesting guy. If you ever get a chance to see Jeffrey Schwartz where he's on stage or something, super interesting guy, really weird guy, but cool. He actually trained Leonardo DiCaprio to become obsessive compulsive for the movie The Aviator. And after the movie, Leonardo had to be treated for obsessive compulsive disorder. So really, really interesting guy. But anyways, so when you have this brain that can change itself, you go, okay, well, what can it change it to? Your brain isn't going to change its past. It can only change its perspective on its past. Your brain doesn't change its roles, but your brain can move towards changing roles, right? So you can move towards being an engineer, being a doctor, being whatever, and then having a new role, being a parent, or whatever role you want to call yourself. You can actually make them up if you want. So we can do these things, which if you look at the identity work, it suggests that I can change my identity to anything I want based upon just the way I decide to look at things, which I think also can be partially true, right? There's some truth in that. But when it comes to who I am, right, especially if you come from a rough past and you come from a place where, you know, you're not proud of your past, you want to change something. And I actually have a video with a really good friend of mine named Patrick that I put online who did that. He came from, like, his story. I don't want to give too much of it away, but he did some really bad stuff. And he said, look, I'm going to be different because this is not who I'm going to choose to be. And then he started choosing to be somebody different day by day. And eventually he became, nobody knew him as this stuff. And when they heard what he had done when he was younger, I mean, we're talking like insurance fraud and embezzlement and almost killing somebody for money. I mean, the stuff that he had done, people are shocked because who he is today has nothing to do with that person that he talks about in the past. A total disconnect. Now, had he decided to follow the identity way, he'd say, look, I'm a recovering criminal, right? Even 20 years afterwards, I still, I can still see in my head, I could still do these things. I know I'm smart enough I know I'm capable because I've done it before, but he doesn't. He says, who I am is this, and I had this past, right? Which is, you could clump it into still the identity stuff, but you could also look at it as something different and distinct. So that's kind of really interesting there. Now, when it comes to integrated information theory, one of the reasons I really like that idea, it's Giulio Tononi who wrote the first book. I think it's PHI is the PHI is the name of the book and the term he uses for integrated information theory for what it is. There's other research that conscious people haven't come across yet, and I haven't understood why. The University of Virginia Medical Center has been doing a study on reincarnation for like 60 years. And if you look up Ian Stevenson, he was the founder of that. Now it's grown to some other people, but it's at University of Virginia Medical Center. It is a department there. And what they've been doing is looking up cases of reincarnation to see if they can figure out what is this. The book he wrote about it is fascinating because he spends like the first half of the book explaining the method of the research, which I found also very fascinating. But he's the way that they're doing it, just to give you the short story, is that what they found is kids, particularly under 8 years old, and they tend to have nightmares, dreams, all this stuff about a previous life. So what this team does is they go and they interview the child. They say, okay, well, tell us stuff, and they tell them stuff, and they're looking for proper names, addresses, physical characteristics of those things, what particularities that are verifiable about the previous life. And then they go and search for this, and they see if they can find it, and they look at how many things are consistent with that. Well, they've studied, I think, 3,600 cases last I checked, and they've been able to what they call verify about 1,600 of them. And what verification looks like is that they have a child who's given them 78 proper things that could be verified, and they were able to verify 69 of them. And the amazing thing is this child had no access to this other place because other places hundreds of miles away in a small village that nobody's heard of, right? It's not like this child believes they were Elvis Presley. This child is like this random kid from another village 200 miles away that there's no connection. So this is the type of research they've been doing. And they don't say reincarnation is true. They say, we found some data that's really interesting, and we don't know what it means. So but this data is there, and anybody can look it up. It's a massive database. They started out finding Eastern cases, and they've now found Western cases, because people, with their original criticism was, but you're going to Eastern places where reincarnation is a belief structure. So obviously it's like there's some bias there. Well, now they found these cases in Western cultures, in Christian families, where there's no concept of reincarnation, but there is the people finding these cases. So what I like about this, by the way, the other thing is after about 8 years old, between 8 and 12, they start forgetting that other life and moving on. So it's like just becomes not important to them, and they just kind of lose it, and those old things go away. But what I like about integrated information theory is it's the only theory that integrates together this other information. Because if this consciousness thing is a group of information that's integrated together, if it can exist outside of the body and then re-inhabit a new baby when it's born somehow, I have no idea the mechanisms. I don't even know that this is true. But this research, integrated information theory, would suggest these two pieces of research can go together. It would also suggest that it's changing, and that after about 8 years, it starts changing. And therefore, the other stuff becomes less important or even unimportant, and the new stuff becomes more important, right? So it's the past is falling away, and the who I am now is moving into where I am right now rather than where my past was.
All right.
So we could talk about this stuff, like I said, forever, but it's
yes,
really
and
interesting stuff, right? And it's very deep.
it is
Yeah.
very interesting, but hold on, pause everyone, because we only have 45 minutes left, and I want to give a chance to the people who have not spoken yet. We have 4 people who haven't spoken and 1 person who's in another place, and so we'll get to the people who haven't spoken first, and then we'll go back to Harvey and Tiffany if we have time. Okay, so
Angela had her hand up.
that's
Angela had
right.
her hand up.
Angela, do you still have a question or comment?
Yes, I do actually. In my opinion, personal identity is a borrowed portion of universal consciousness. And I happen to believe that universal consciousness is the grand unifying force that physicists have been searching for.
Could be. Nobody knows. I mean, Roger Penrose's stuff is suggesting that consciousness is the collapse of the wave function. Like that's what it is. And that's not proven, but it's interesting. So I think right now the door's pretty wide open for lots of stuff. I just think we just don't know. We don't know enough to say anything is correct or not. We just have the data we have and we can make stuff up about it. But there is no definitive anything at this point.
How about you, Andrew? Do you have something on your mind?
Sure, a little bit tired today, so I'm not all the way here, but I do have a question for you in regards to free will and determinism. I happen to believe, I know this may be offensive to some people, but I think people will always do what they determine to be in their own best interest. I was wondering if you disagree.
Well, let me take it to a neuroscience level, getting to triggers. Your brain has an innate, in fact, all of our brains have an innate group of triggers. We put them into 5 categories: security, autonomy, fairness, esteem, trust, and you. And typically what the brain works on is minimizing pain and maximizing reward. And minimizing pain has a far larger impact on us than maximizing reward. So let's say 5 to 10 to 1, right? So like we're willing to have false negatives or false positive. We're willing to have false positives when it comes to avoiding threat rather than false negatives. What do I mean by that? I mean, you walk down the street, something out of the corner of your eye looks kind of like a snake. You're going to jump away very quickly. And the fact that it's a stick after the fact is less important than that you wouldn't have jumped away and it would have been a snake. And we accept that type of thing. So our brain naturally is going to say, I want to minimize reward. I want to minimize risk. I want to minimize threats, and I want to maximize reward. And the triggers, the sensitive I have to each of those triggers is what's going to determine what's going to trigger me to minimize threat, right? To work to minimize threat. So if, for example, we do a lot in business circumstances with this, but I'll just give you general examples. And if you want to go into business examples, I can. So if I am really high on the need for security, which means I'm looking for certainty, right? I'm looking for consistency, then anything that is not certain or consistent, I will want to get away from or hurt or do anything I can towards. And something that gives me certainty, I'm going to go towards, right? That's in my brain's interest along that trigger. The same goes with autonomy. If I'm high on the need for autonomy or low in the need for autonomy, I'm going to have different reactions for things. And they're going to be serving my brain's need to avoid threat and to maximize reward, right? Towards or against. And it's based on my sensitivity to each of those triggers. That is the way our brain is wired. However, we're not required to listen to it. But if we don't do something, it will automatically go that way. Or if we don't know about it, it will automatically control us. Right? That's why on my book, I actually have a marionette being moved by strings, because we can. But there's a lot of examples of people who don't. There's a lot of examples of people who say, you know what, who I am is this. And independent of all that other stuff, I'm going to keep going forward because this is who I'm going to be. And a simple and maybe superficial example is like a marathon runner who's hurting like hell, but still keeps going. Even if their body and their brain are screaming at them to stop, you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to do all this stuff, they keep going. Just because because they're not even going to they don't even have to get first place to keep going, right? So it's not like they're getting some massive reward for this. And they could have run a lot of marathons, so it's not their first one. They're just doing it because they said they are going to. And we can get into more profound examples, like the ones from Viktor Frankl, where there was people in the concentration camps who bread was life, and people would break into the hospital that he was overseeing and steal the bread from the sick and the dying. But then he said sometimes there was people who'd come in to share their bread with the sick and the dying, knowing that that would mean their own death, knowing that would mean their own hunger would be worsened, knowing that would mean more bad things for them, because who they said they were going to be was this. Now, you could argue that that was in their interest, right? Which, okay, fair enough. But at least it's not in their brain's interest, right? So that's where I would distinguish, say, maybe brain triggers aren't everything, but naturally that's what your brain's going to do. You're absolutely right. And people do tend to just do that automatically because it's easy. Well, it's easier and it's survival, right? It's part of the way that our bodies have been constructed to keep us alive.
Antonio. Oh, go ahead, Andrew. You have a follow-up?
I'd say thank you. Interesting.
All right. Antonio, are you there? You're muted, Antonio.
Yes, I'm here. No, I don't have anything, no comments or questions.
All right. Thank you, Antonio. Let's see. Julia, are you there? Have you been listening? It's hard to tell. I'll ask you to unmute.
Yeah,
Ju-
it's good to listen to you, Chris. About determination, I remember reading when I was younger. I read a lot of New Age things and went to 12-step programs, and I read a book called by Shakti Gawan. Have you heard of her?
No.
Healing the Child Within. And
No, sorry.
it was about doing things to basically to not be that determination, to not to counteract the effects that were happening to you in life. I and trying to use, instead of using the right hand, using your non-dominant hand and writing a story that you need to write to whoever it was to write, to your parents, to the stranger that harmed you, to whoever it was, and talk about it to relieve yourself of that burden that you had for yourself. I guess what I want to know is, with this determination, can you possibly rid yourself of being in that determined pattern?
So there's a couple things interesting about what you said. What the person's doing actually is using basic psychology, right? So, using your non-dominant hand, right? That's just neuroplasticity. You're teaching your brain to rewire itself. And you're just using, when you do something different than you're used to, your brain will automatically start wiring itself differently. Like a piano player has to learn. It takes them a long time to get their brain to wire so that they can play with two different hands at the same time. And you can train your brain to do that. And that's what that aspect is doing. When it comes to journaling, journaling is a fantastic thing, partially because it helps you put things into a context that move an experience or an idea from an emotional part of your brain into a logical part of your brain, because you actually have to put it into words. And that actually helps dampen some of the emotional reactivity. So therapists use that all the time in order to help people to overcome strong emotional difficulties. So it's a very normal and common technique. So I understand why they put it into the overcoming the determinism. I wouldn't put that in the deterministic category as much as I would your natural habitual momentum, right? So your brain is wired. Your brain wants to make things easy. It wants to minimize energy use. So it shortcuts lots of stuff, and it creates just basic rules, heuristical rules, so that you can do something quickly rather than have to think about it. And so that's what your brain is doing with all aspects of your life. So if you have some past stories that have hardwired themselves in, and you have initial just quick responses to things, like, for example, your partner says something that, maybe your parent said that triggers you, and all of a sudden you just react. You don't think about it, you just react. And what they were meaning had nothing to do with what your past was, but you've habituated in a hardwired response that just automatically comes out. So you could call that somewhat deterministic, and it is. That's how your brain works, because it's easy, minimizes the energy use. By pushing yourself to change that step by step, by moving what you're doing is you're opening up a path. You're using some simple, just psychological tools to open up a path to do something different, to get those let's say the normality of those heuristics down in your brain, so that you can make an alternative choice. You can put alternative patterns in your brain and create alternative habits, right? So that's kind of what their goal is through that process, and it's a pretty standard psychological tool that therapists use.
All right, Julie. Julie, any follow-up for that?
Using the non-dominant hand is a process too.
Well, the non-dominant hand, so all they're doing is, it's kind of weird. When you do work to train your brain to something else, there's some suggestion that you build up some self-regulatory ability. It takes work in order to change. And so you're getting your body used to doing work to change, so that you can then increase your self-regulatory ability. So then you can do other work to make other change, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like you start lifting weights in order to build up your ability to lift weights. But if you're building ability to lift your weights in your arms, and you get really strong arms, you go, oh, I know how to do this now. So now I can lift my legs, right?
Okay, so it's building another muscle.
Yeah, exactly. It's something like that, or at least that's the theory, right? But it's not exactly correct, because I could learn to play the piano and do all the work to play the piano, and that doesn't make me going to be a good runner, right? So there is there might be some overlap there, but it's not as much as some people suggest.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Finally, we go back to Harvey.
Thank you. So first of all, I neglected to tell you the name of the woman who did this wonderful presentation. Her name is Nikki Johnson, Nikki Johnson. And I think you have a lot of similar things, and perhaps, and she was the first one who actually taught me about microtubules. So that was a fascinating thing. She also spoke of astrocytes in the brain. And that's another piece of it. And of course, the major thing was that the brain is a receiver, like a radio receiver, from her point of view, instead of just a standalone thing that we experience. And therefore, it's capable of getting messages, information, or whatever you want to call it, vibrations from the universe. And I was going to ask you, have you done any work? Oh, and you mentioned the brain that changes itself. That was Norman Doige who wrote that.
Yeah.
What was the name of the book that you were citing?
So if you look up Jeffrey Schwartz.
Jeffrey Schwartz.
Yeah, okay. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz. And the name, I think the name is something different, or something similar to that.
Okay. I want to check that out.
But Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz, and I'm sorry if I got the name of the book wrong. Yeah, he's written a couple books, so you have to look for that specific one.
And then I'm wondering how much you've used the work of Rupert Sheldrake and his morphogenic field theories that have been around for quite a number of years.
I'm not familiar with his work.
Rupert Sheldrake? Oh my gosh, check it out.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, one of the problems is there's so much research to read. So I'm reading probably between 2 and 4 hours a day. And the volume, so to give you an idea of how much the research has grown, back in 2000, I think maybe 2012, we wrote the annual review article for the Neuroleadership Journal, and we had to go through about 1,500 papers just around neural leadership in order to write that annual review. After 2012, the number of research papers just on that topic released each year made it impossible to write an annual review anymore. So, and that's just one small segment of all of the research that's out there. So there's all of these different areas, and to keep up with all the research is getting to be quite impossible, to be honest. And to verify, like for example, the concept of the brain being having like an antenna or something, I would have to look at her work. It seems like you'd have to have a field somewhere that you could show that there's reception in there. I have no idea what that research would look like. Maybe somebody's done something. I can imagine how you could do some of it, but I can imagine that thing in and of itself. You are not your brain. You're right. That thing, and he actually says it's the brain that changes himself in that book. So you can see that the amount of research that would be itself might be huge. So honestly, one of the things I struggle with is just simply keeping up on the volume of stuff, especially since what I'm looking at is covering a cross-functional group of things. So it's really tough. So I actually can't claim to be an expert on everything, and I hope you can appreciate that.
No, that's cause for great optimism, though.
Yeah.
I've been under the impression that too many people are not looking at these things and the anomalies that are that need to be researched so very, very much. So yeah, the anomalous experiences of people are generally swept under the rug. So I'm happy to hear that more people are jumping in and actually starting to check them out and validate them.
What's really tough, and like I said with the consciousness studies, the neuroscience people and the integrated information theory people who are still computer people basically, and all of these other groups, they're not talking. They don't talk to each other. They still live in silos. And so across disciplinary stuff is still very short supply, but partially because the knowledge you need to get from one silo in order to cross-reference to another silo, and then what you have to get there is just massive. And it's very, very hard to do. So that's one of the issues. I have a friend that does mouse research. She does tuberculosis research. And the stuff she has to study, and she's like, look, I'm spending hours and hours a day just reading about how to do mice stuff. It's like, it's one little teeny tiny part. And I'd ask her something else about some other disease that's using mouse stuff. She's like, I don't know. I never get a chance to look at that research. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very tough to read all the stuff and to keep up and to cross-reference things. And you also have to consider that one study doesn't validate an idea. So you can have, in fact, because of the way they have 95% confidence limits, with 100 studies, it may be that only 20 of them actually, only 20% of them are actually correct. So, and that has to do with the way the statistics work. So when you get one study, you also can't pay attention to it, at least not so much. So a lot of us are looking for things like reviews, where you have somebody who's looked at 1,000 studies and then put them together into one paper. But that's also not so common as we might like. And there's still a lot of those. So it's really tough to keep up on all the reading. So, but that's part of the joy of research.
Do you think AI may help with the efficiency of this, or detract from it?
Well, we don't know. So AI is going to help, and it already is helping with certain things, right? But you have to train it. So once you train it, and you're training it usually on specific things. So in some of my work, I'm using AIs for different projects, and it does help a lot. But at the same point, you still have to verify it, because AI is also dream.
And sure.
All you have to do is go to ChatGPT, ask for a whole bunch of articles on something. It'll give you a whole bunch of articles. Then go look for the articles, and you'll find out they were all made up. Like, it's great. It made up the article.
Yeah.
So the article title, the reference, everything, it made it all up. So you're still going to have a human go in and verify that stuff. And, it's not so easy. So we hope, like when it comes to cancer research, you're able to train an AI on how cells grow and the different aspects of things and blah, 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 blah. You can model it better. And then it can help you discover some stuff because it'll see patterns you don't see. But some of this stuff, I really hope, but I don't think we're there yet. And I still think humans are going to be needing to verify things for a long time. So it might speed stuff up, but it might not. Right?
Chris, you mentioned early on in this conversation a study about with business students who were suicidal, and I was wondering if you could tell us more about that and why were they why did they have to be subjects who were suicidal, and was it particular to just business students? Can you tell us more?
So it actually wasn't a study. All of our business students go through the leadership program, and it's become quite well known. And some people come there because they're people in business that are suicidal, and every single person in the program gets a private coach, and they also all talk to me. And so that's how I know this stuff, is because we go through those types of things. We also have a lot of students that have been seriously abused. It's surprising when you really give students the opportunity to talk about themselves in private environments where they're really working on themselves, and there's an outlet where they can actually have a chance to grow and to get through it, how much of that there is. A lot of people look at students, especially when you're in a master's program, is wow, they got their lives put together, you know, they're executives or whatever, and you find out, well, actually, not so much. So that we don't do studies on that stuff as much as we do helping them and coaching them as they go through their own discovery process, their own growth process. And people now, because they know about the program, we're seeing more people like that coming to us.
All right. Hung, I want to welcome you. Hello, how are you? And have you were here for the last 10 minutes, so you have a sense of what we're talking about, yes?
Yeah, so for having me. I was running around the house and I just lost track of time. As you know, I'm here on the Panhandle and we have two time zones, Central and Eastern, and I got mixed up with the time. So sorry about that. And then number two, with the topic for today, it leads us directly into the world of peer support, emotional support, mental health support, which I'm trying to get into. Is a very broad topic with so many different modalities, I think, that I'm trying to pick up on. I'm trying to pick up on that relevant to my current work, my current practice as a peer support. And it's very in depth in this field of yeah. So
Yeah, I mean, peer support, and people are social in general. So, I mean, not in our modern society, not having peer support is actually kind of weird. Historically, that's been the rule. It's more now that we're not doing it, right? So,
and I do appreciate that you touch on AI because you know, we are keep hearing AI all over the map now. Every day you open your eyes and they keep on pushing AI topic toward you. So so thank you
yeah.
for touching on that.
I think one of the things. So I also work in I work with a startup. I sit on the board of a startup that also includes AI. And what you realize is that all those companies are working to raise money. They need investor money. So they need to get known for being the AI company so that other people who have money want to give them money. So you're going to see it shoved down your throat because they want to see that they need to show their client bases are growing. They need to show that there's interest. They need to keep the hype up so they can get more money so they can have a chance to cash out and be that unicorn. So yeah, you know, just like blockchain was really big in the past for the same reason. Now it's AI, you know, one of those things. There's going to be real stuff out of there. There's going to be a bunch of garbage out of there. Just the nature of the way the market works.
All right, you guys. We have covered a lot. Now, now we could end early. Are people okay? No. Tiffany says no, she's got too much on her mind. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I don't have anything. Well, I have a lot to say exactly, but I don't think it'll all get said. I definitely like that Virginia study on reincarnation. That was really a wild thing. And when I
Oh,
think about
you
it,
should look into it. There's a lot of research, even to the point that there's birthmarks. They were able to show birthmarks are correlated with the way that somebody died, and they have cases about it.
yeah,
The guy wrote a book with the cases. It's fascinating. And
I'm
unlearned
gonna
languages. I mean, where people are born speaking another language, but there's no way to learn it. I mean, really,
yeah,
really super interesting stuff.
yeah. And to think of like, I think that's where infusing a bit of chaos is important because of the whys and the hows and things like that. Like when I think of reincarnation, I think of, there's the karmic reincarnation and things like that. And then maybe there's just playful reincarnation. And then there's maybe, karmic retribution or karmic, like all of those different things. And so to hear that there's a university actually studying something is so edifying for me. I'm I don't study at a university level, this thing. I more so kind of like in the wilderness with it, and so when I in the chat said, it's like studying echoes to you, because it's like this is being said in like everywhere. So then from the bottom of the social hierarchy all the way up to like the universities and things like that, to see that this is just happening, and people are understanding it and then looking for a mechanism to prove it is funny, actually. Like, and not in a ridicule way. Like, it's just like, I get it. But I could also see how looking for a mechanism to prove it can do a number on a person psychologically and spiritually. And so you have to have a really strong constitution and before you go into the like academic proof, I would say. Because when I think about it, I think about how much people, because of course for me this ties back to spirituality, and how much people hold on to their spiritual beliefs, and then to have them either proven or disproven is quite a event, I would say. So
Well,
yeah.
I don't know that they'll be able to prove. So imagine this study you'd have to set up, right? You'd have to set up a study where you had like 1,000 people that you knew everything about them, and then you told them, when you die, ask this question so we can find you again and double check that it was you. Like give them like a secret number, and when this child wakes up, they have this secret, right? They would have to do some study like that, which it to this day is not even a feasible thing. So and will it ever be feasible? Probably not. So they're also concerned that they'll never be able to prove anything. They'll just have this really bizarre data that they don't know what to do with. So academics have it really
It's
tough.
just echoes. What do echoes do? Like they just continue to like to be echoes. And I think like generationally, as I personally, I don't think we're gonna reach like this pinnacle as a group. I think that people are gonna reach their pinnacles of the mountaintop, so to speak, in an individual fashion, and we'll continue to have this wheel. So this research goes back and back and back and back and back, and it just confirms to people on the path as they're moving through the path, like, yeah, dude, like you're not quote unquote crazy, right? Like this is some real stuff happening here. Just keep on the path. So being able to like, we're it kind of like looking at it as being like at the marathon, in doing these things. I'm glad to know that this content is being taken seriously at an academic level.
Well, if you look at like why I'm doing this, so I mean, a lot of the stuff we're talking about is interesting, but most of it isn't going to change anybody's life. And so part of the work I'm doing is how do I actually help somebody to change their life so that they can be more aligned? Not because I necessarily believe alignment is necessarily a good thing, right? But just because it's a way to live a life. And so my goal is to create a process that helps you right now and right now and right now. That's doable, that leads to an outcome that's probably a pretty good one in general. And that's what you want.
Yeah.
So it's more about that. And like I said on the podcast, part of the reason I did this was because after I finished my engineering school, I asked myself the question, is this really the life I want to live? Or is this the life that was just put in place by the momentum of me wanting to show my father that he was wrong about me?
Yeah.
And when you're in that place and you go, wait a second, how would I choose something different? Because do I want to throw away all this good stuff in order to go the opposite direction? Well, no.
Yeah.
So how do I choose my own path from here?
Yeah.
And that's where this started. And then I'd realized, hey, maybe a bunch of people are in this situation and they like have a past that's been the moment that's led to where they are through some momentum. And they want to also choose a path and they don't know how. So how could we? And then I wanted to be as scientifically accurate as I could because I didn't want to hurt people. So that's how I got into this. I wanted to use research in order to just not be a guru who's just throwing out just some belief structures. And where I have beliefs in there, I tell people, this is my belief. I don't have evidence of this. This is the research I've used. And from this research, this is the conclusion I've come to. And I might be wrong. Right. Sorry. Okay.
Hey, you guys. Helen Newman is back with us. Hello, Helen.
Hi, well, that sounds like a very interesting thought that I must have been missed. But I'm usually on it because I know how to kind of get out of things, even if it's not the whole thing. Thank you.
Helen, do you have, you've been observing for a while. Do you have any comments or questions for our guest, Chris?
Well, I think he seems to be a sincere person, and the truth is, I cannot deny that I didn't get the cracks of what he was saying, but something like, from what I got already, something like, know yourself. And I will add, be kind to yourself, compassionate to yourself. I'm adding that because that's what I need. I hope other people need that too. So let me, listen a little bit more, and I guess I'll get a little bit more out of it. But seems like a passionate, well-spoken person that you have here, I guess. I very much appreciate.
Very good, very good. Now we have a special treat for us. It's called The Chaos Poem by Angela Serio. Go ahead, Angela.
Well, it's not really called the Chaos Poem. It doesn't really have a title. And I've done it on here before. I believe it was in response to something that Tiffany had said about chaos. And since that came up so much, I'd like to share it again. Light in all its forms, universes of harmony, the simple mind that was before evaporates in mystery. Am I that or something more? I know that I am me. Will I be lost in chaos as my world comes clear to me? All that is found within all that will ever be. Will I be lost in chaos as my worlds come clear to me? Yet out of chaos I did spring the me I am today, still drawn back into this world in which I found my way. But is it real? I question still, even as I know. Life is the mystery to me, unraveled as I grow. Ta-da!
Yeah, yes,
Beautiful.
yes.
I like it. That's beautiful.
All right, looks like we're going back to Harvey.
Yeah, so Tiffany, you made me think of this. The background that I happen to have right now is from the James Webb Space Telescope. And everything that I've been reading about what the Space Telescope is showing us is that our answers are always only superficial. We've moved from 13.5 billion to 13.8 billion years of a universe that started with a Big Bang. And now they're even starting to question, as a result of what the James Webb Space Telescope is showing us, maybe there wasn't even such a thing as a Big Bang in the first place. So I subscribe to the idea that every answer will create many good questions to be answered again. And so I don't see But it's not to say that the work that you're doing, Chris, and especially it's admirable that you're using it to apply to human beings. I mean, theoretical science is wonderful, but what does it do for me is really the most important question. And how can we create a better society individually and collectively? And so there's nothing wrong with that question, and going for an answer and coming up with some process that will help people is a wonderful and admirable thing. So that's really all I wanted to say. One more thing that just came to mind. Are you familiar with the fMRI studies that they've done where they discovered that people actually had a brain reaction before they actually saw the thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I'm familiar with that. Yeah, so there's a couple of questions on that. So there was one done in the past, and there was a new one done. And what they found, so look at the multiple studies, because it's been redone a number of times, and it's been now redone with more accurate equipment. And what they found is the overlay between the time of the brain firing and what would be considered conscious, the error bars are overlapping now. So in fact, they actually don't know if you're conscious at the same time or not. So there's some questions now on the original study just because they have more accurate measurements.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a look. It's super interesting. Like, because the guy who did it, he redid that study, and he talks about all of the details about what they did in the past and the equipment they have now, and how the error bars have changed based upon the new technology and that, and how now it's more of a question. So it's super interesting. By the way, a couple things. James Webb. So the 13 point something billion years, there's actually two ways of measuring the age of the universe, and they don't agree, which is actually one of the biggest problems in cosmology right now, because you have the cosmic microwave background, and then you have the standard candles, and those two methods are totally different. So they don't know what the problem is, but they now realize that their estimation, however, and they're both supposed to be very accurate. So they know that there's a massive problem in everything, which goes to show that even when we think we know something, probably we don't. So it's all that stuff is fascinating.
Now, Stan,
which brings me back to that statement that you made about certainty that the brain needs. I think the principle of uncertainty really throws that off, not only in terms of the atomic discussion, but maybe that isn't even what our brains were hardwired for. That certainty isn't necessarily, it's survival, perhaps a survival mechanism for sure, but I think that we can transcend that need for certainty, and actually possibly at this time in our evolution, we actually need to transcend that need for certainty.
Well, think about it more like a bell curve, right? Or more like a continuum. So some people have less of a need for certainty, and some people have more of a need for certainty. And so you have a broad spectrum of people, right? So it's not that, so our brains all need a level of certainty, and then there's what sensitivity do you have to this? There's people with a very, very high need for certainty, and they're the ones that are, maybe having a harder time changing. They like the process they have. They don't like change. They're also the people who don't like information that contradicts them. Then you have the people with a low need for certainty who are more exploratory. They're more interested in, just experiencing new things. They actually like the change. They enjoy the change. They thrive in change. But there's all types of different folks, right? From the extremes all the way through. And that's actually one of the things I think that makes us interesting. So I wouldn't want us to push everybody one way, because that would be maybe more boring than anything. So I think we need all of those different things. But,
all right, now it's Stan's turn, but Stan, we're coming to an end with this whole beautiful conversation. We have less than 10 minutes, Stan. Can you limit your comments and questions and stories to 5 minutes?
I'll be a lot quicker than that, Dan. Thanks.
Okay.
I just want to comment. You said, but maybe I'm wrong, Chris, and that really resonated with me. And I think the other people who've gotten to know me here in the group have heard me talking about epistemic humility for a long time. I'm a big fan of Gregory Bateson's. Have read a lot of the papers, and stuff's in ecology of mind, but he talks about epistemic pathology in one of his later in his life papers, I think from around 1972. And it struck me that that's so important. It's so lacking in our world today, both in academics but wherever. If you look at YouTube, everybody's got an expert and everybody's got an answer, right? And they know that if you do what they tell you, it's going to work out a particular way. And so when you said, but I might be wrong, I just really appreciated that. And that ambiguity to me is really important, because there might be another. That leaves things open for a better solution. It doesn't mean that you are wrong. It just means that it needs more exploration. But I'm curious about your work, and you're probably both doing research and teaching where you are, and it sounds like you're busy, you're doing a whole lot of different things, but I'm wondering if there's one thing that you would like to leave with us today, and before you go into that, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us today. It's been a really interesting and inspiring hour and a half. I appreciate it. Is there one thing that you would like us to know from what you've learned?
It's a great question. I don't know that I have a great answer. There's so much. Thank you first, and it's for you to you, Stan, but to all of you. I mean, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a pleasure meeting you all. I think the one thing, if I had to just pull something out, the universe is big. We talked a little bit about that. The thing that's kind of cool to me is that, as far as we can tell, in at least hundreds of light years, and maybe thousands or millions of light years, there's not been any other conscious things found. And so, as far as we know, at least in this sector, we're the only ones. Again, I could be wrong, but that's what it looks like so far. And is outside of this reincarnation thing, even if you include it, like until you're 8 years old, you're not going to remember only a little bit in the next life. So we really kind of only have this moment now. Like, this is what we got. And the past is the past. Like, we can't go back there. And the future, we don't know what it's going to bring, because we don't know if we're going to be here in 2 minutes from now. So this is what we got. And I just think, well, first, this minutes that I've had with you guys have been great. But also just to remember, like, we got this. We don't know what else we got. So we might as well do the best we can with it, whatever that means to us. And yeah. And I think what highlighted that for me a bit was a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying, the Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, where she said that number one regret was people not being truly who they were in their life and letting other people dictate who they were going to be. And so that's always stuck with me very profoundly, is to encourage people to be themselves and to enjoy this moment, because that's what there is.
Thank you.